Welcome to Leading People with me, Jerry Murray. This episode of Leading People is brought to you by Wide Circle, helping you make better talent decisions. To learn more, visit widecircle.eu. That's WIDECIRCLE.eu. Leading People is a podcast which features insightful conversations with leading people about leading people. Yes, that's a play on words. In each episode, you get tips from leading people such as CEOs, HR professionals, authors, and thought leaders on all aspects of leading people, including how to attract, engage, develop, and grow talent to build successful organizations. And we provide insights on how to lead yourself so you can consistently perform at your best. In this episode, I chat with author and crisis expert Caroline Sapriel. The COVID pandemic has given us all a first-hand experience of a crisis unfolding before our very eyes. And it's no longer something happening over there, but in our own daily lives. In times of crisis, we turn to our leaders to steer us through. But what if they let us down? Caroline Sapriel, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Jerry. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's my pleasure as well. We know each other quite a while, huh? But there's a lot of people out there may not know you yet. So maybe we could just start with that sort of classic question is, how did you get here today to be this expert on crisis management? And was there something along the way, a person, place, or an event, or something, or an epiphany moment that sort of brought you to where you are today? Or was it just a series of things? Perhaps just give a little bit of your background now.
Sure. I think there's definitely a single moment. I had studied Mandarin and Sinology, and I headed off to Asia in the early 80s. And I ended up working in Taipei in communications for a consultancy, a large consultancy. And one of my early projects was I ended up working on a major plane crash. And so I was doing corporate communication for the agency. And then I was thrown at a fairly young age. It was 1987. And in this, having to get on a plane with a plane full of next of kin and reporters and have to fly from Taipei to Mauritius. It was a South African Airways crash from Taipei to Mauritius. And it crashed in the Indian Ocean, and we had to take everybody and be on the ground to do all the support that we could. And I felt that what I was doing there was a lot more meaningful than just regular corporate communications. And so I ended up developing some expertise there. And then I subsequently worked on a couple of other crises, one in the pharmaceutical sector, another one in the tobacco sector. And so I moved to Hong Kong in 1990, and in 91, 30 years ago, I decided to start CSNA International together with my partner. And our objective was to really focus on this field. I always felt that whilst crises seldom started with communication, they often ended up in the lap of communicators to sort out the mess, with the press primarily at that time. Now it's multiple stakeholders. But in fact, to really be more resilient and to be better at preventing and detecting and mitigating, you had to look at more than communications. So I felt that the communications piece to crisis management was rather limited. And so when we started CSNA International, we really decided to take a much more integrated approach, looking at risk management, crisis management, business continuity, and really from a raft of different functions and factors internally and externally that can cause a crisis, and how organizations can become more resilient overall.
Yeah, and we might get you to expand upon that in a little while, in terms of leadership in the world today and a little crisis that's going on for most people called COVID, which is bringing maybe the concept of crisis to everybody's doorstep during the last year or so. You You decided a few years back to write a book called 25 Years of Crisis in Review, The Good, the Bad, and the Truly Ugly. So what prompted you to write the book?
Initially, it was our 25th anniversary. I have to say that before that, about 4 or 5 years before that, we had written and we had published another book, which was actually the first audiobook on crisis management ever put out there. And it was Tales from the Front Line. And it was a series of crises as well as simulation scenarios that my partner and I had written or been involved in. And each one took a number of lessons. And the lessons were drawn from the 10 Commandments of Crisis Management, for which we had won a Gold Quill Award at IABC. So we tried to make the analogy between these cases. So building on that, we then had our 25th anniversary, and we thought, okay, what do we do with this? And we thought, well, why don't we look back and see at the last 25 years and try to take learnings or catalog these crises and sort of good, bad, and truly ugly, and making the analogy with the Italian, the spaghetti Western, as we all know. And it was very interesting because it's a fact that a lot of the crises that are publicized and a lot of crises that get known are more the ones that are badly handled. It seems that one of the virtues of handling a crisis well is that it doesn't stay in the news as long. Right. So we felt it was important to make a distinction between the ones that are well handled, the ones that are kind of handled, and the ones that are truly bad from the beginning and really ugly, because there's a high level of attribution of responsibility and guilt in them. In fact, in academic circles, there is a categorization of crises from low, medium, and high level of attribution of responsibility. And even if you have been involved and you are somewhat responsible, because you always are responsible for your own crises, if you handle it right from the beginning, own up, then your level of responsibility and guilt decreases. And it's remarkable how well stakeholders respond to this as long as you're consistent throughout. And so that's what we did. We didn't want to make the book necessarily an academic, book or an academic effort, rather something that could be used as a reference. And we published it. We actually gave it a copy to all our clients as a gift for our 25th anniversary. And actually, since last year, what we started doing is we've pulled out chronologically in reverse one case every couple of weeks that we actually share on LinkedIn. And the latest one is very interesting because it's a 1994 Texaco case, which really is about racial discrimination. And with the conviction of Chauvin for the Floyd murder, it was so timely. We didn't design it that way, but here we go, 1994. We know that racism and discrimination goes back a long way, but this was already there. And obviously now it's getting much more attention, more and more all the time. So that's the history of the book. And I have to say that we're about to publish, because it's our 30th anniversary this year, we're about to publish the new version, which is 30 years of Crisis in Review. We've added 5 cases plus a bonus one. And the bonus one is an ongoing analysis of the Boeing crisis, which started in 2017 and it keeps going, actually.
Yeah. Right. There's a lot to unpack there. And I know that's something you feel quite strongly about when you talk about the topic of crises and crisis management is the role of leadership and the competency of leaders. And I suppose that's where the maxim of the buck stops somewhere comes into play. So if we took the good, the bad, and the truly ugly, what sort of, if we unpack that down to the leadership level, the ones who do display the competencies that make it good, and the ones who kind of go down the spectrum to the truly ugly, what are some of the mistakes you've seen, and what are some of the things that you've seen leaders do so well that others could learn from?
I think to start with, what is useful is to consider the difference, which is a difference we make between a crisis and what we call a reputation train wreck or reputation meltdown. So there are organizations out there that have had huge crises, and somehow they remain crises. They were difficult. It's hard to imagine in today's world with all the risks and the issues we face that any given organization can have an entire life cycle without a crisis somewhere along the way. So crises exist. They happen sometimes because there's some mistakes, oversight, sometimes the wrong decisions, or purely accidental. You're in the wrong place at the wrong time. And this is typically the kind of crises where the threat is coming from the outside versus self-inflicted. And a reputation train wreck, the main difference is that you lose stakeholder trust. A crisis inherently is about uncertainty. And I always found it interesting that we call the discipline crisis management, because in fact, the idea that you can manage the crisis is not really there. The only thing you can manage is the way you choose to deal with it. Yeah. Uncertainties have crises have a lot of uncertainties. They have a lack of control. You're not in charge. That's actually part of that definition, is that it's out there and somehow it's developing. It's got a life of its own. And so how you choose to answer that is the degree of management that you have. And often it's not so much about management. It's about leading through the crisis, finding a path. There's been a lot of analogies with sailboats or ships in storms, where you basically set the course and hold the course. And a lot of organizations don't remember that they need to set the course at the very onset of the crisis and try to hold on to that course no matter what. And it's holding that course and communicating that course that actually helps retain stakeholder trust. It doesn't mean you're going to be liked. It doesn't mean you're going to get brownie points. It means that whatever happens, the actions you took, the decisions you made are going to be credible, and you will retain trust and credibility. So avoiding a reputation train wreck requires ownership. It requires setting the course. It requires sailing in that storm and holding that course. And those are some of the competencies that crisis leaders need to be trained in. The challenge is that when you're talking about crisis leader, a lot is at stake. And a lot of leaders, organizational leaders, feel that they're on the spot. You could say probably that at some point egos come in, because you say, how am I going to be judged? It's me. I'm in charge here. And some people handle that well, and other people don't. And those that don't necessarily handle it well don't recognize that they could be trained to handle it better if they had been shown the awareness, if they had gone through enough crisis simulations, if they had recognized and be taught that you need different competencies to manage a crisis than a bad week at the office.
Yeah. So as you talk about reputation, and reputation is quite a personal thing. In many situations, even if an organization's reputation is affected, it often seems to affect the leaders who are at the top of that organization too. How does that, is that the catalyst for a better approach? The impact that it will have on your reputation, is this a key catalyst in terms of how people think about and approach crises when they, either even if they haven't met a big crisis yet, when you're talking to them about what would happen if, or they start to head into a crisis, or does it get pushed to the background, or does that make a difference? That's what I'm trying to get at. I think if my reputation was on the line, I'd take it damn serious how I'd approach it, even if we never had a crisis. If I'm not aware of the reputation that I might be creating or sustaining or maintaining by my actions, then I might be taking actions that actually contribute to making the crisis worse.
Absolutely. And I think there is first got to be an understanding and appreciation for the value of reputation in an organization as an asset of the organization. That is beginning to take shape. In fact, we are just in the process of making an agreement with an underwriter that is actually developing a reputation risk policy. So it's trying to actually put numbers behind the value of reputation. So there is an enhanced appreciation for that. There is, and that has been surveyed over the last few years by different organizations where CEOs say that reputation is the most important. Now, they may say this in peacetime. The question is, can they say that? Do they continue and say that in times of crisis? And I think if you prioritize reputation, remembering that reputation is afforded to you, it is given to you. It is not brand. Brand is what you say about yourself. Reputation is what others say about you. If you put that as a priority, then it will guide your organization through the worst possible times. I often say that companies that have these big mission and statements and value statements in the lobbies of their headquarters, very often it's a bit of a test when you're in crisis. Can you live by those mission values and business principles in the middle of crisis? There are organizations who look at the bottom line way too much, and financial impact, operational impact, way too much compared to protecting reputation. So there may be, and I'm not even sure that's the case, a short-term gain in trying to protect your bottom line, but there's certainly no long-term gain because you lose the trust of your stakeholders. We have come up with a phrase called the pear principle. P standing for people, E standing for environment, A standing for asset, and R standing for reputation. And it's a way for, organizations, crisis teams, leaders to remember what the priorities are. If you follow these priorities, that people are always first, then environment, then you look at your asset and your bottom line, and then in that order, you have a chance of protecting reputation. So I think that some leaders lose sight of that when they're in the crisis, because sometimes the pressures are too great. And stakeholders are the one factor that can really make or break a crisis. And it's much more today than it was 30 years ago. It is so complex. We've a globalized world. We have social media. We have stakeholders coming from all corners of society putting pressure. And I think leaders that try to please all of them are never going to make it. I think you just have to prioritize what is right for your organization, for sustaining reputation and trust, even if you're not going to be liked. Another image that we often use when we try to teach crisis leadership, when we teach that to our client leaders and crisis teams, is the metaphor of a dark tunnel. So you could use the ship in distress or the dark tunnel. If you're in a crisis, you're in a dark tunnel. You don't really know how long it's going to last. You don't know how long the tunnel is. It's very dark. You don't see how many bends or what. You don't see if a car is going to come at you. The only thing that you know from having been in tunnels before is that there usually is light at the end of the tunnel. And that light is what you need to focus on. That's setting the course. Because the stakeholders are going to push you around. You're going to bounce around the walls of that tunnel. And when you come out and you have the imagination or the image in your mind that you are bruised, scratched, but in one piece, and all your stakeholders are looking at you outside of that tunnel, and they say, okay, all right, you handled it. Whereas if you come out and go broken up, you're done, and you're in that train wreck.
Yeah. There's a lot of, reputation itself is a sort of values-driven thing. It's even a value maybe in its own right. And you mentioned other values there, like trust coming into it. I guess integrity. I suppose it's a question of leaders being aware of what their real values are, because that's also going to define what's important to them. So if they're able to define values that are really their own values, they can be more congruent with them. That model and that metaphor, I guess that certainly gets the attention of leaders. What sorts of skill sets do you try to bring out,
right,
in terms of what's missing?
Yeah.
What do you see missing sometimes, and how do you bring out or keep, because I'm sure our listeners are going, okay, great stuff, Caroline, we got the context. And now, if I was a leader, what would I have to learn to do to be better?
And indeed, so I think fundamentally you got these values of authenticity, honesty, transparency that make up credibility, that make up reputation. So if you've decided you're going to lead your organization through a crisis and protect these values at all costs, then indeed, what is next and what do you need to have to be able to make this happen? Well, so one of the things that is valued in normal management models today is management by consensus. So very much involving the entire team in the decision-making process so that everybody owns a piece of it. We know that implementation is better when people have been, given a chance to take part in the decision-making process. That's fantastic. However, in a crisis, you probably don't have time for that. So the leader needs to switch to much more of a command and control style management, because there is often no time, and some of the decisions have to be made so quickly to consider everybody's opinions.
Apart from comparing crisis leadership to an accordion, which, by the way, is my main instrument, Caroline goes on now to provide advice on how to organise your team into 3 subgroups and what hard and soft skills you need to get you through a crisis.
So I use, you're a musician. I don't know if you play the accordion. I think you do, right?
It's a two-handed job.
Well, I always compare the leadership style in a crisis to accordion, because the leader needs to instruct his team. Oh. And he needs to collect the input, bring it back to him, and instruct again.
So in case our listeners aren't aware, Caroline is moving her accordion in and out now at this moment in time.
And so that is the style of management. Now, each team has a number of functions around it, from HR to lawyers to communications, operations, and that's fine. And those functions need to be on that team. But beyond that, we like to think of a team broken up in 3 subcategories. One group are the doers, the people that will take the decision and make that happen, either through the ranks of the organization or directly, depending on the size. They will implement measures to mitigate. They will fight the fire, so to speak, at a high level. They're not emergency responders. But then you have the thinkers. Those are the ones that have to think of all the stakeholders and start really mapping stakeholders. So who's going to be on your side? Who's going to be against you? Who's going to be neutral and could shift? And what is their perception? What is their position? And how do we mitigate and how do we reach out to them in a way that is going to be believed and trusted? And the last group is what we call the support. All the support functions of a team, from logistics to making sure there's food for the team, especially those that have to work 24/7 for a while, all those other things. So if you kind of shape that way, and the leader recognizes that he can't always consult with everybody on the team to make decisions, and that the team is aware of that and accepts the shift in management style, so that they know they're going to have to defer, because at the end of the day, the buck stops with him or her. And I don't know if I was thinking about this movie about Churchill that came out a couple of years ago about the decisions to cross the Channel to get the boys home from France during the Second World War. And there's a very, very good scene describing this, where he's trying to get the cabinet to agree on his decision. And he finally sits and he says, no, at the end of the day, I'm going to make that decision because I'm the only one sitting in this chair. And so I think there is that component, which is important. And then there are a number of other structured skills, and we divide them in what I call soft skills and hard technical skills. So the technical skills would be anything from the ability to be interviewed by the media. That's a skill you learn. So that's a hard skill. The soft skill is empathy, managing perceptions of stakeholders, And those things are learned through behaviors and special ways of. A lot of them are cognitive, actually, in style, and they become very, very important in the middle of a crisis. And then, of course, there's self-preservation in a way, because the leader is under a lot of pressure, and you can see leaders, like I've seen in crises, that are very comfortable in that role, and others who have not been trained and are less naturally comfortable with it. I remember seeing not too long ago, working with clients and through a simulation, where the crisis leader stood, and a lot of crisis leaders stand because they want to have that overview of what's going on. And at one point, he realized the team was getting quite stressed. And he had this uncanny ability to tell everybody, okay, everyone, calm down. Let's refocus. Everybody's getting stressed. Does anybody need a break? Should we take?
Yeah.
And that ability to sense his team and to speak quietly, softly, and at other moments say, okay, that's it. We've got to make a decision. This is my decision. I've heard everything that I can hear. We don't have time. This is my decision. And I've made a risk analysis. And I think this is the best possible decision in the current circumstance.
Yeah. There's something, this, as I listen to you, I'm hearing something. I mean, I'm working with tools around these things myself, and we have a tool about how people go about delegation, and it's the ability to combine two paradoxical traits. One is this authoritative trait where I'm prepared to take a decision and accept responsibility for it, combined with the collaborative trait, which is I'm prepared to get other people involved in my decision making. If you're a leader who does that normally, so you've got, and you have to step, so our argument always is, and the way this concept is developed is, sometimes you need to be on, we present it on an XY axis. Sometimes you need to be authoritative. Sometimes you need to be highly collaborative. And sometimes you need to have a balance of both. The leader that has been practicing this in their leadership style for years will get permission to be authoritative and will get people to follow, because the trust is there that in this situation we're in today, we can't sit around a table and start brainstorming how the world works and have everybody nodding at the same time. And I'm hearing that even though I'm pretty sure, okay, you're going to take people through drills and trainings, there's almost a culture thing going on here, isn't there?
There is. And it's absolutely that. It's kind of striking a balance between and recognizing that at a certain moment, you got to put your foot down and make the decision, even if it's not got everybody's support. And at other times, you have to build this collaborative style of working. And the teams that are very experienced, and some industries are extremely well practiced, they're very comfortable moving from that style to that style. And recognize that even if they don't agree with everything, somebody has to at some point make a decision. So yes, absolutely. And where I think there is an issue is when the ego gets in the way, when your sense of self, you feel threatened by the situation, and you're more focused on how you're behaving rather than what you need to do for the good of the situation.
Yeah.
So that needs to be kind of calibrated, and the leaders that are experienced can do it. I think inherent values have a big impact on that. How you've been raised. There's a lot of factors in there. That's why, to be honest, crisis leadership skills is not a field that has been extensively researched. Leadership skills, yes. Emergency response commanding skills, yes. Tactical response, yes. But crisis leadership skills, the academia has not been able to really frame it. So much so that a few years ago, a major oil and gas client came up to us and asked us to develop, because we have an assessment, a competency assessment protocol, asked us to put their competencies, in that shape so that they could start training their teams against those competencies, as opposed to a tick the box we've done a crisis training. So there is movement in there. which I think is fantastic, because it does take different skills. It does take a different approach and different skills.
In the final part of our conversation, Caroline provides examples of the good, the bad, and the truly ugly when it comes to dealing with a crisis. What examples can you give where you've seen leaders come in and really, because you said the ones that the good crises, let's call them the ones that are handled well, they don't make the media, and so we hear about the BP problem, and what the leadership did there and everything else in the Gulf and all this stuff. But what are the things that you're seeing that leaders really can do very well? See, we've talked a little bit about this already, but are there some real examples where you could say there was something that happened, and the way that they approached that, we didn't even notice it, but it could have been a serious reputation issue for that organization? Do you have any examples like that?
Yes, absolutely. Well, if you go back in time, Tylenol is often stated as a case that's best in class. Because even though it was very different times and we didn't have social media and we didn't even have 24/7 media, there was faxes. And you have a situation where there's an external threat. The product Tylenol is being tampered with cyanide. 7 people died in the Chicago area. And I have spent quite a bit of time. I was invited by the Trademark Association to speak with the in-house counsel of Johnson & Johnson on this case. So I ended up looking at it quite in depth. And what the CEO did, and by the way, he is in the 500 CEO Hall of Fame for his unequivocal leadership during this crisis. He said, I don't care if we lose Tylenol, but we are not going to have another fatality, and we are going to protect Johnson & Johnson, the reputation of the organization. Because he was very aware that Johnson & Johnson, what is associated with, is, of course, baby products.
Yeah.
So that is that mission statement I'm talking about, that's setting the direction and holding on to that direction. And he did everything to follow that, empowered the team. He was prepared. He recognized that it was such a big deal, so risky, that he could lose, and he was prepared to lose the Tylenol as a product, which was the best-selling drug at the time for OTC painkiller. And so he really was very focused. He took on the main media in the US and told his story. He talked about why it was important, why at the end of the day, he needed to protect consumer trust. And that is what guided him through everything. So I think that's a very good example. And a much more recent example, there was a major hack against Hydro Norsk, an aluminum company from Norway. They handled it absolutely phenomenal, the way they did that. They owned up. They empowered everybody. They really migrated. They were very quick. They used social media to be able to deal with it. They recognized they first of all made a decision they wouldn't give in to the hackers, but that they would do everything to protect themselves and empower their people to protect the organization. They lost some money, but the trust that they gained and reinforced is fantastic. That case is in our book that's coming out as well. By contrast, the way Boeing was handled is abysmal. For a company with such a standard for best in class, there was denial, perfunctory statements, no empathy for all the people who died. All the stakeholders were not managed. And on top of that, there was this sort of insidious relationship with the FAA, which, of course, then in the end, the CEO had to resign because there was a new FAA director who said, this is it. They were self-regulating, basically. So that's an example of not very good ownership. BP, it's very sad, actually, for BP, because BP had everything in place to do it right. But there, I think it was down to one individual in his ego who was not also a very good communicator, and basically decided he was going to handle everything himself nonstop. It's a very long crisis. It lasted 3-4 months, in a very concentrated period. And he, I think he got sidetracked, and he didn't display the right values fundamentally. Because when it happened, a lot of our clients were saying, "Well, how could you do this?" And my initial response was, "Look, they've got a hell of a lot of pressure. This is pretty tough, and he's trying to do the best he can, and he's going to make mistakes. Anybody can make mistakes in a crisis." And then by August, when he went on a £500,000 yacht to celebrate his son's birthday, I thought, where are your values? Come on. You got 11 guys that died on these platforms. The beaches are ruined. You got a massive spill. Have a barbecue at home.
Yes.
It felt like, and there you start to question, where are your values? So I think values is at the core, decisiveness, the ability to cut the cake when you have to. I think risk analysis, too few organizations or leaders make a simple analysis when they try to make their decisions or take the decisions, literally weighing the pros and the cons. And too many of them consider too many factors that are almost not relevant here.
Yeah. We also, believe it or not, help them measure that and understand it as a paradoxical pair, being able to take a risk and at the same time see the consequences, so that you hedge the risk. Risks will always have risk in them. It's important to realize there's uncertainty there. It's just, have you thought through what might happen, and have you thought how you would deal with those things if they did happen, is quite an important skill for leaders to have. I just wanted to get towards the end of our chat, which has been fascinating. And I wondered whether you could take all this knowledge that you have and all this experience and give us some insight into some of the good, the bad, and the truly ugly aspects of managing COVID. Because I'm sure the listeners, if there's one thing they can identify with, they must be able to. So you could probably write a whole book on it anyway, Caroline. At the same time, maybe a few kind of pointers that also people can not just, we can poke fun at COVID or whatever, or point at people, but what kind of factors maybe you could take and reflect on, and even in the organizational context, are the things that people could just glean from that, where it would help them be better ready for any sort of crisis type or reputation impacting situation in the future?
Yes, and so COVID is a beast of its own. Because everybody's impacted. It's ongoing. There is no discrimination. The scope is huge. The impact is huge. One of the things that leaders need to do, which is completely counter nature, in fact, it's counter human nature. When things are bad, what do we do to protect ourselves? And you will know that from your training and the things that you do, is hope for the best. That keeps us going. Yet in crisis, you really need to think of the worst. And only when you've trained yourself to continuously think how much worse it's going to get, can you actually put in place some of the mitigating measures that may help you ride the storm and come out on the other side in one piece. And that has been failed across. There's a few organizations that have done that. I'm not going to go into names, but I think very few people said, even though science said this is going to be bad, there's going to be 2 waves, 3 waves, there's going to be new variants, it's going to be like this, it's going to be like... The human mind has a hell of a time trying to accept such a level of uncertainty and ongoing negativity.
Yeah.
And so if you accept that, leaders at their level, they're the only ones who can actually say, okay, give me the bad news. Continue to give me the bad news. Because whilst I'm trying to keep everybody motivated, another part of the organization is going to have to keep thinking, what do we need to put in place, because it is going to get worse.
Yeah. So can I ask you a question? Because it's almost like there were there was the scientists who were going, this could get a lot worse, and we even seeing trends. You kind of had this political establishment on the other side. We had a few very big cases of this where it was all, no, it won't last. It'll be all gone within a week. It'll be, everything's starting up again, and sort of talking up something that we seem to find out afterwards they knew was not a good story. So tell us a little bit about what lessons there are in that.
I think
If you've got the tendency to be that talk it up type person, what's they don't want to be a naysayer, because they probably say, we can't have negative messaging. We can't be dragging people down. We have to talk positive because there will be a day when all this will be gone. And true, I mean, even the scientists that would be their positive intention in their warnings, is if we take it seriously, etc., there will be a great day of freedom at the end of it. So
I think it's public health crises have never particularly been well handled for kind of the same reason. This one is on another level because of the sheer scope of it. But in fact, politicians react exactly in the same way, which is we shouldn't say too much, because too much includes things that mean that it could get worse, but we don't know. And so, by contrast, they say not enough. Granted, a lot of them improvised, and granted, a lot of these leaders and country leaders have opposition parties to contend with. So there's the stakeholder map for you. So you're navigating the need to actually deal with your constituents and your public, your population that actually wants somebody to trust. But if you are transparent and you're giving bad news, on the other hand, you got your opposition parties that are going to grab this and turn it against you. At the end of the day, they're going to grab it anyways, because that's their job. Opposition it's their job. So you shouldn't be managing with a view of satisfying the opposition. You should be leading with a view of retaining your population trust. And I think that's what a lot of leaders have not done. Because they're afraid, and they say, well, it's causing panic. If we don't give good news, it's going to cause panic. Or if we don't give enough, it's going to cause panic. And panic has, to some extent, existed, hence the conspiracy theories, because when there is panic, people go into self-reliance to go for information that satisfies them.
Yep. So tell me, is it just a coincidence that some of the people who seem to have, let's say, a better handle on this were women? Or in terms of their approach to this, is it something in that an instinct a woman has for, caring or looking at it more holistically? I just wonder, because a lot of female politicians a while back anyway were getting quite lauded for their handling of this particular crisis. And actually what you're talking about, some of them were very straight with the people. They didn't beat about the bush. Now, one or two of them might have even had a scientific background, which might have helped them at the time because they really understood the nature of the science. You just saw this ability to go out there. And is it that ability to show compassion? You see, delivering a message without compassion, you can try to make it sound like you identify with what people are going through. But if you truly have compassion, you really you deliver the message from the perspective of the person hearing it.
And that compassion is what we talked about earlier, which is these inherent values that you carry as an individual and organization. Now, the compassion is important, but more than anything else, I think it's the ability to put yourself in the shoes of stakeholders. Yeah. And a lot of leaders, and perhaps more men than women, I think there may be some studies that are going to be carried out against it. A lot of leaders care more about their sense of power and therefore are blinded by that to some extent and fail to put themselves in the shoes of the population or of the people that are impacted. I'll give you one last example, which really kind of really describes this very, very well. Quite a few years ago, we were asked to train a whole team of people in China around a major rally marketing event that they were sponsoring. And the name of the rally is the Hong Kong Beijing Rally, and they were a major sponsor. And so we created a scenario whereby in the evening, a car, because those China country roads are really bad, but a few years ago they were even worse. A car loses the convoy and basically goes off track at night because there's no light on the road. and hits a family that's playing mahjong on the side of the road, and the five-year-old boy dies. And that was a scenario. And they had to kind of think about what would be the appropriate response by this company sponsoring this event. And it took a long time. A lot of them say, oh, I would say this, or I would say that, and I would say this. And one guy raised his hand from the back of the room. He says, I think as a person watching this on the news, watching their statement, the only thing I want to hear is that they're never going to run this again until they can make it 100% safe. And of course, that is the ultimate best statement. So instead of communicating from your perspective, in a time of crisis, isn't it better to communicate from the perspective of what does your audience want to hear? And how can you satisfy that? Can you satisfy that? And can you give a measure of that satisfaction? That ability to transpose yourself from your perspective to your stakeholder perspective is the biggest challenge for crisis teams and crisis leaders, and one where they can really train. And that's why we believe that 2 or 3 people on that team should only do stakeholder mapping and worst case scenario development and feed that into the rest of the team. Because it's a deliberate effort. It's not easy. And the worst case scenario is completely counterintuitive. So I think that's, those are the things that I would recommend. Hopefully some of them have learned it. We had a couple of clients who really called up on us in the last year who say, hey, we need to take this forward, what we did with you guys. Can we have an online session to walk us through again what could be our worst case scenarios? Where are the gaps? Where can we see? And then others who completely went a little bit like their head in the sand, hoping that they would, ride. And
so Caroline, if there are people listening now and they're thinking, I think I'm well enough prepared should something happen, and others thinking, oh my God, she's put the fear of God into us now. What would be 3 practical things, just to finish out this, obviously probably synthesizing what you just said, what would be 3 practical things that somebody in a leadership position in an organization could do tomorrow? I like to finish on something that people can really do. Just 3 practical things they could do. Don't have to be highly intellectual things or anything, that would help them at least understand whether they're ready to deal with these things, or ensure that they've safeguarded or protected themselves from the worst things.
So the first thing is that I believe leaders need to have an active stake into the crisis preparedness of their organization. This is not something they can delegate. They have to drive it from the top and also be involved, because at the end of the day, when the crisis hits, they're going to be on the front line. So that's one. Secondly, recognize that you don't manage a crisis like a bad week at the office, and therefore recognize, what do I need to do so that I'm better prepared and my team is better prepared? And thirdly, go back to your inherent values. What do you believe in as an individual, as what is inherent to the values of organization, and do they stand the test of time and the test of crisis? Can you defend them when things are not going well? So those are 3 things. So one is an actual ownership and real practical, you need to be involved in the crisis. The second one is to actually be very much part of it, map scenarios together with your team. And then the third one, go back to your values. That's the values that drive the good, not the bad or the truly ugly. It's the values that will drive a good leadership in a crisis.
Right. So I'll put some references in the show notes. When do you expect the new version of the book to come out?
We're in final review, so we're hoping next month. Very soon.
Okay. So is it better then to wait for that version than to buy the existing version?
I think if people want the existing version, they can always contact us, and we can probably send a virtual, an electronic version, an e-copy of the book. And then they can always get the 30th if they want to afterwards. Either way.
Okay. And I guess they can reach out to you on things like LinkedIn and that if they want to connect with you. So, Caroline, thanks you. It's been wonderful chatting with you, listening to those words of wisdom and fantastic insights. And I hope that our listeners have taken something valuable away from this conversation. So thanks again.
Thank you so much, Jerry. And it was really enjoyable. I really enjoyed talking to you. And I hope I gave people a little bit of food for thought.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Jerry.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode. You will find details of what we covered in the show with links, etc. in the show notes. Please share your key takeaways from today's guest and let your friends and colleagues know about the podcast. Oh, and if there's a particular author or leading thinker you'd like me to interview, just get in touch and I'll do my best to get them on the show. This episode was brought to you by Wide Circle, helping you make better talent decisions. To learn more, visit widecircle.eu. That's widecircle.eu. Until next time.